years ago, and used to catch perch. We used to run all over town, fishing every little hole we had in Marshall, Missouri, and used to carp fish J&H Carp Lake. Do that on Friday and Saturday nights. I mean, we've done everything: river fish, blackwater, salt fork. We fished a lot of tournaments. I placed in a lot of tournaments, and then one year I decided to call Chad. Chad had come down and guided with me on Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma. And he actually made 2 or 3 trips down there. And we wore him out catching crappie on Eufaula Lake. And I knew he could set the hook, and I knew he could catch fish. And I decided that if I'm going to move back to Marshall, which I had that in plan from Oklahoma to move back home, I needed a good partner. So I called him. I said, he had a partner. I said, think about this. Tell me later. You and I teaming up, and we'll go after the Missouri State Championship. There is a team that just won, and I've had him in my boat, and I know dang good and well that if he can win the Missouri Championship, we're going to smoke him. So anyway, he called me back, and we teamed up, and we started fishing. In the first year we fished the Missouri State Championship, we lost by 1/100th of an ounce. And that fish was in the boat, and I set the hook on the fish we needed to win it, and it came over the rail, and it missed the pail, and it landed right in front of the passenger seat on the windshield, and it come off my hook and went right on the other side of the boat. We had about 5 minutes to the tournament was over. So we went back and lost it by 100. And then I think we won the Missouri Championship the next 2 years. I think we lost it the next year because we tied and lost it on the maximum weight. And then we won it the next year, I believe. We won 3 years outright. But the good thing about the Missouri State Championship was we fished 3 lakes. We fished Lake the Ozarks, we fished Mark Twain, and we fished Truman Lake. So it's not like this is our home lake. So I'm going to turn it over to Chad, and he can introduce himself.
Yeah, just real quick. Chad Maupin, born and raised in Marshall. Started fishing down here when I was about 10, so 40 years worth, on this lake. Started out, and we'll go over some of this. Started out basically just throwing a little 5, 6, 7 foot rod on the bank when the spawn hit, and then after that it was minnow fishing with a little weight on, catching crappie. So that's what we did. If you, like Barry said, if you got any questions about live scoping, we can answer some of that. We're probably better old school fishermen right now, but we are learning on the live scope, and hopefully this year we'll be a force to be reckoned with. We'll see.
The key thing is, I'm an old high school teacher, middle school teacher, a football coach, and wrestling coach. And I hate, let me say it again, I do not like to lose. And I got a partner here that's even worse. So I thought it was a pretty good match. Sometimes we don't talk a lot, and sometimes we just there's nothing good to say, just don't say it. But we have a lot of fun. That's the key thing we have about fishing, is he and I go into this whole thing about having fun. I'm an educator, so I love to teach. And I probably talk too much, but if you've got questions about crappie fishing, I don't care what level of skill you have, you need to be here and be here again tomorrow at 4 o'clock, because we're going to finish up the day talking about crappie fishing again. We've got some great vendors. Palmer back here in the corner is crappie fishing. He and I visit. They've won the national championship last year. Right up here, Timberline Guide Service, Waylon Shanks. Great fisherman, one of the best, top notch on the live scope. If you've got questions, see him. Binks around the corner is selling spoons, vertical spoons. You jig, catch crappie, catch walleye with them. Those are 3 that I know. And you've got other vendors in here that are outstanding. Make sure you see them and stop by their booths.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Everhart's. They probably got one of the best crappie stores, catfish stores in the state. So, and hunting. Yep. We don't do a lot of hunting, but we get a lot of fishing stuff. So anything you need for crappie fishing, hunting, duck hunting, basically all hunting. I know they're selling a lot of kayaks now. That's a big thing. We're seeing a lot of those on the lake. So appreciate everything they do for us. And you know, we got a great resource right there, right in front of you.
How many of you know live scope? I use it. 1, 2, 3. I know. Okay. 4.
Yeah.
Well, let me just start with what I'm going to talk a little bit about old school fishing and what I do, and the equipment that I use. I've got sponsors that go back years, okay, and I still have the same sponsors. I don't jump around with my sponsors. I know I could have gotten on with B&M. They sent me stuff. B&M's quality rods, good stuff. I did use B&M rods when I spider rigged, but I've used all of them. I've used Ozarks, and I've used every spider rig rod out there. I do believe B&M gave me the best sensitivity on the rod tip and setting that hook. It took us a few tournaments to figure that out, but we went all B&M with that. But all of my jigging poles have been Huckabee rods. I've been with them ever since this rod was created. When the prototypes come in, it was in my hands. I was staying with Todd Huckabee. These are Todd Huckabee rods that used to be Quantum. Quantum sold out, and an individual, one of our clients, picked it up, and he started having them made. But this rod, I started with 9.5, well, actually the first rods I was using were 10-foot rods. 10 meat dragger, 10-foot dipping stick, and then the pulling rods. Those were the first 3 rods he had. And the reason I use them is because I love the Tennessee handle. I've got most of my clients are middle-aged or up, and then I get the little ones come in because I like to promote crappie fishing to the youth. But the key is, this rod, when you set the hook, I hold the rod like this. I never grip the rod. I am a golfer, sorry about that, but I do golf, and you don't grip a golf club like a baseball bat.
He tries to golf.
He golfs, I try. He's right. So I hold this thing light in my hand. And so this rod tip, this Tennessee handle allows me to just lay it on my elbow. So the feel of my bite, when I feel a crappie bite, I'm holding the line in my hand, and so I've got contact here, I've got contact here, and I got it all the way through my forearm. So I never watch my line. I'm not a crappie fisherman that watches my line. I got to see my line. No, it's all feel. And because I'm telling you, I'm a jig fisherman through and through. I hate using minnows. I do have to use them on the trail. But a jig fisherman knows that if you feel anything touch that line, you better be setting that hook. I'm talking about set the hook. My wife took me grocery shopping with her, and we were buying groceries, and I was pushing the cart. And I turned the cart to go around the aisle, and somebody bumped into me. I about turned the damn cart over. I'm telling you, it's ingrained. It's ingrained that if I feel anything with this rod, I'm setting the hook. If it happens to be a tree, so be it. I'm setting the hook. Okay? And if you stay around here long enough today, I'm going to tell you 2 things that you do not know probably, and you will learn when you leave here. And one of them is this. So when I say that I set the hook, I do. So when I get hung up, I don't worry about losing jigs. Crappie fishermen are the tightest quad people there ever is. They're getting better. But I use hooks that don't bend 90% of the time because I tournament fish. Most crappie anglers want hooks that bend because they don't want to break it. They want to get the hook back when they get into that cedar tree. And so they'll straighten out that Aberdeen hook, that gold hook, and bring it back and bend it again and drop it back down there. And it'll catch a fish. It really will. But these things get hung up, and Chad and I we worked together and fished together. But when I was trolling, I slow troll like this. I use 2 rods. I slow troll just like this. This is old time fishing. And the rod, if the boat's going this way and I'm running the motor, I'm just like this. 45 degrees out on both sides, and I usually have this reel upside down. So again, I go forward with 2 jigs on, and I have my rod tip about 2-3 inches off the water. Because when I set the hook, it's coming all the way up here. And the next thing that happens, the fish comes over the railing in the boat, and I just drop it, it'll come off, and I go again. But I use a lot of times 2 jigs. And I use big hooks and big jigs. Not all the time, don't get me wrong, but this is what I love to do, and I use it because I catch big fish. and I'll catch little fish. Don't think that a little crappie won't hit this bait, because I got it in there sideways in their mouth, and it's not even buried, and that little fish comes in. The big thing about using big baits is you set the hook when you feel it, and it'll hook in the bone of the mouth, the roof of the mouth, and that's critical. When I see my clients, and I'm watching my clients behind me, and you just got bit. Yeah, I know it. Set the hook. I will. He'll come back. No, he won't. You missed him. So we talk like that all day long, because I can watch their pose and tell them. And the key is, somebody that doesn't fish very much don't know that. I mean, when you feel that, and I see that little pole tip, you just got bit. I know it. No, you missed it. And when this jig comes in like this, and it's hooked like that, you got bit. It just didn't happen like that. You got bit by a crappie, and you missed it. Bottom line. So I use 2 jigs. I tie loop knots, and I usually use braided line. I use Power Pro line. This happens to be this is what you call Seeger fish, 8-pound fluorocarbon is what I got on here. But I got a lot of braid on. And a lot of times I'll tip a Power Pro with a fluorocarbon leader. But this is kind of what I do a lot. So I was going to show you that when you get hung up, I don't worry about getting hung up. Put your foot on that jig. Nope. All these jigs have hooks on them and they're pointed. And so if you stick it in your hand, it's not my fault. I'm telling you. You didn't sign off on that, but I'm saying that. So when I get hung up, my poles are down here like that in the water, and I get hung up with that jig. All I do is lift it up, and I'll pull like this, and then I'll snap it and drop the rod down. Bass fishermen don't know what they're doing. Hold up. They go snap, 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 snap. They're hurt. Well, when you do that tight, you pull it tight like that, and then you drop it. That quarter-ounce jig head will fall right off. Okay? The other part is, I'll guarantee you get them off. 95% you're supposed to hold your foot on it.
I thought you were
He was scared. He didn't want to go, where do you work at?
It's a little store over there,
Okay. All right, I'll talk to you. Now, the other way to do it is you come up here like this, and you get your line tight, just like that. Hold it tight. And so you pull it down and drop this. You with me? You see what I'm doing? I'm dropping it, and I'm stretching this. When I use fluorocarbon, or I use any line that stretches, I can snap that, and that jig head will fall. Reel it up. He learned it. It works.
We named that the buried Morrow.
You don't lose jigs. Why? Because my dad I gave him every jig he ever used, and he doesn't like to lose it. So I had to teach him how to not do that. But that's what I do. That's how I troll. When I first moved to Truman Lake and started jig fishing after I was married, I did this. My clients would do this. In today's world, we pull up to a tree and see how many fish there are and pick out the one we want. And we catch them.
Yeah, so just a little bit on that. I went down and fished with Barry first time in Eufaula, Oklahoma, on Eufaula Lake. I think it was 2010 was the first time. And, you know, I was always a crappie addict then, but after those 2 years of doing this technique right here, and most of the fish were in 10 to 12 foot of water, and we were fishing 10 foot deep, and we'd have 2 poles. And the nice thing about it is, this is just a form of spider rigging. So, I mean, but you can hold your poles. That's basically what it is. So 2 guys got a pole. I'm either outside of him and he's up front of the boat, or we're sitting side by side. So if you don't want a spider rig and buy a bunch of rods, you can buy a couple of these with these jigs on here. I think we were catching 60, 70 fish a day probably down at Eufaula. I came back here the week after, and it was February when we started. And I went into a creek and I thought, I'm going to try this method. So went in there, and in 3 hours in one creek I caught 166 crappie. Didn't keep one of them, but that's how good this technique is when it's working. It's a form of spider rigging, but if you're a jig fisherman, you really like to feel the bite, this is what you do right here. You've got, instead of a weight and a minnow hook or a couple weights on there, you've got jigs on there, and you've got And most of your bites probably come on the bottom one, but at times they want that little smaller one on top. And you try and you fish a couple colors like that. But on Truman Lake, this method right here is deadly. So just remember that. Mostly, this is this 3/16
That's
a quarter.
that's
This is
quarter,
quarter and an eighth is usually what we use. If they get finicky, we might use a 3/16 and then put a 16th on top. But it's just a loop knot. Barry ties these all the time. This thing's kind of hanging freely like that. But you really need to fish with monofilament when you do this. This isn't a braid type deal. This is mostly monofilament or fluorocarbon.
The key to this loop knot is that water has current in it. I don't care how slick and smooth you think it is. You put a jig down there, there's current in that water. It's going to move that jig. And this jig is sitting like this, and most salesmen will say, "Man, that jig's no good. It's hanging upside down." Well, the truth is, when you drop a jig in the water, the flotation of that plastic is going to bring that tail up. And if it hangs at all, that's a dang good thing. Because if you've ever minnow fished, which I don't do anymore, but when I was a kid, I threw minnows back in the lake at the end of the day. My job, my dad working on a cabin, my job as a kid, about 8 years old, was to get to the dock and go fish. And I was on the main dock. Be there all day, bring the fish back, keep clean them. I'd get up and go fish the next day. That's how I grew up. But the key is, I knew that when I threw dead minnows out in the water and they'd be floating, some of them would do this and then they'd lay there. It didn't take long and boom, there'd be an explosion out there. That is a fish attractor when that fish is moving like that. And when they're head up, tail down, you've got a dying minnow. So if there's any tail action that goes down and this bait's moving, you're just attracting fish. Artificial bait, you are imitating a live minnow. That's what you really are imitating. But that's very important to know. I had something to tell you about Chad. He said something about we catch most of them are on the bottom, but sometimes you catch them on top, and sometimes you catch two. And Chad, I saw him catch two before, and I said, kind of slow on the hook set. He said, "What do you mean? I got two fish." I said, "Well, you already had one on the bottom. You so slow setting the hook, and the second one did."
Oh, man. Primal pain.
You know, that's what happens. You got to really keep track on your clients. But the bottom weight is the heaviest one, and the lighter one's on top. You go to Louisiana, they do it in reverse. They put the heavy one up here and the light one up here, because when they troll, they want this action like this. They want the heavy here and there. And the difference, the reason I don't do that is because when a lot of the bites pick it up or take it down, they just don't go up. A lot of times they just sit there and put it in their mouth and hold it. But when you put the heavy on the bottom, your line is tight. I call it tight lines catch more fish. Every time. So I don't care what kind of fishing you're doing, keep your line tight in the water, you're going to catch more fish.
The other advantage to this little setup right here too, so you guys know on Truman Lake there's a little bit of, there's some wood out there on Truman Lake. So when you're spider rigging and you're going into that wood, you know, your poles are dipping down, they're way out there. You've got total control of this right here. You can go into those logs. You got to keep an eye on your line. As soon as your line starts coming like this, then you just pull it up, and we call it walking it. So you can walk it right through that timber where those fish are staying with this particular method right here. It's deadly. I mean, I know a lot of people like to spider rig, but if you want to get into wood and be able to get it unhung, just like he showed you there, and walk it through that timber, you'll get in there where those spider riggers aren't fishing, just with this method right here.
Everything he said is good, and what we've been talking about is accurate. But if I'm a first-time fisherman going out here and doing this, do I just throw my boat in the water and get out there and start fishing? Well, the key thing is you need to understand where the fish live and how they move. Most crappie like structure. Okay, that structure can be a big boulder, it can be gravel, it can be rock, it can be trees, it can be anything. But any contour of your line, of your water, the soil underneath, the bottom of the lake, the contour is called, in my book, it's called break line. And I'm fishing break lines. Almost always I'll fish a break line. If I'm not fishing a break line, I might be out on a flat that's totally flat, but I'm looking for a little ditch in that flat. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of things I'm looking. A little crevice in that bottom is where I'm going to run. Your sonar is really critical because it shows you the contour lines, and you might get in between two contour lines. When the contour lines are tight, it means deep water. When they're spread out, that means flat, not very deep. So those are things that I keep in mind. Where do I just go fish at? Well, you need to go get along the bank parallel and fish contours. Look for that or use your sonar. I started out fishing, like I said, when I was really young. And my parents, we had 4 boys, and we'd go to the lake for a week, and the kids would scatter. Now, my folks would be around somewhere, but I would put on a light jacket. My dad would give me a pala, a beetle spin, and just a jig, and I'd walk the banks. And I learned a long time ago that when I started casting as a kid, because you just gotta love to cast, I'd throw as far as I could and nothing. And when I finally decided to throw along the bank, out away from that bank, and I'd bring my jig back parallel to the bank toward me, I started catching fish. So I learned quickly that the deep water, I couldn't probably catch it very much. You have to hit it just right. So a lot of the bass fishermen are firing at the bank, but they're firing at structure. Or you're going to see them get parallel, and they're going to rip that jig all the way to the bottom of the spinnerbait water, and they're bringing it back contour right down the lines. So those are critical things to learn if you're starting out fishing. Crappie and bass, you do a lot of the same techniques. Okay? So that's what we're doing when we're out here on the flats. Know that they like structure. So wintertime fishing right now, a week and a half ago before this last 9 inches or 12 inches of snow I got in my yard, I was putting in, and I had ice to go through, but I got out into the open water, and then I had a bay, creek area that I was going to go fish. I was on the Osage, and I had to go through some more ice, and then I got in there, and the mouth of that bay was open. Why was it open? Probably because of the wind hitting it from all directions. You got back toward the back, everything was frozen. But those crappie were congregated in 30 to 60 fish in a ball. They were crappie. Not on every tree. They really weren't hanging on a tree. They was out the edge of it. But they were in 20, 25 foot of water. Before that, I was out and I was catching them anywhere from 16 to 20 some foot of water. 12 to 14 foot down, occasionally 16 foot down. Then you can use 2 jigs, live scoping, easy to see where you're going. You can watch that jig go down. But even if you don't have it, take your pole, and this is 11, this is the 10.5 Elite. Great tip. You need to feel these rods. Great tip, a lot of backbone. Pull down. I mean, this, you can see how stiff that is and straight out. That's what puts that hook in the roof of the mouth. When you set that, no bass fisherman uses any rod that bends from here to there. They make more money than anybody on the fishing tour. You can't tell me, I mean, the softest rod a bass fisherman's got is a crankbait rod. But if you got a Carolina rig and you're throwing it out there and dragging it off the bottom, or a jig on the bottom, you got a stiff rod. It doesn't make sense. All these rod makers, I mean, there are some really good rods out there, and all of them will catch fish. All of them will catch a fish. But I'm just saying, if you want a power hook, set the hook, get him in the boat, you need a rod that's got a backbone. Okay? And that's critical. Bass fishing, do not use crappie fishing. You don't need a flimsy rod. Any questions before we move on? Any questions at all? All right, after these fish are out here in the deeper water, where do they go? It's going to warm up here. What's going to happen next? We're going to start having a spawn. Okay, I fish, the big fish I like are staging fish. And they're going to be staging in usually 12 to 9 foot of water. That's where they're going to stage at. If it floods, I mean, believe me, fish will spawn in 2 foot of water, 3 foot of water, 5 foot of water, but they'll also spawn out there in 10, 15, 20 foot of water if it's all screwed up. Everybody gripes about the core. I listen to them. Everybody gripes about the core pulling water. Pulling water, they screwed it up. Well, no.
I mean, these fish know to adjust. They know when the water's going down or up before we do. And they will adjust. So if you got a lake that you can't catch fish up in the shallows, move out because they're out. If it floods, pour down tonight, we're catching them on the bank tonight, 3 foot of water, 2 foot of water, and big rain coming. And in the morning, I get up and 5 inches of rain. I go back and fish that same spot. Those fish aren't going to be there. Yeah, they are going to be there. If the water comes up, you think, well, I need to move up. They were in 3 foot of water last night. They need to be. No, those fish are going to stay right back there where they were until the water settles down. Then they'll move up. Okay? And if it starts sucking the lake out, well, then they move out in the water. So don't worry about spawns. Okay?
Yeah, just a little, I grew up fishing with pretty much a rod like this. This is a St. Croix rod. You can get them at Everhart's. They're a great rod. They're not that expensive. I mean, they're as good as a Loomis that costs $300-400. And trust me, we went through everything, all kinds of rods. We went through trying to figure out what kind of line to use. But when the water gets up to about 52 to 55 degrees, any of these creeks, Lake of the Ozarks, the upper end of Lake of the Ozarks, great place. And this is, bass fishermen like to cast, I do too, for crappie. So this is probably one of my most enjoyable ways to catch crappie. So when they're pre-spawning and spawning, this little rod right here, and I'm going to tell you what line to use. This is Berkeley Fire Line. Okay, and I use it. This is the only type of rod that I use that on. I use 3-pound diameter, 8-pound test, and I've used every form of line that you can do. And what Barry talked about a little bit earlier is crappie are going to be near structure when they move up to the bank. So I want to cast where the structure is, and the reason I use this line, same way that he's able to flip that jig off the bottom. If I get hung up with this line, now you're going to have to be careful and not get hung up. Hold that hook where I can't hook it. No, just like that. Just like that. So when I cast the bank with this, and I got structure and log and everything else that I need to do, and I get hung up with this, and the jig that I'm using is just a little road runner, and I normally always use 16th ounce road runners. Everhart's has got a little 16th ounce with nothing on it. You can put a little twister tail on it. That's also probably one of my favorites. That and a twister tail with the spinner on it. I like the spinner because it controls the fall better for me when I'm doing it. So if I'm hung up on the bank, 99% of the time I can get off. It doesn't matter what I'm doing.
If he throw it in the water, he wouldn't be on the bank hung up.
Well, this is stuff I can't see. Anyway, I take this rod and I put a little pressure on it right there. Just get a little pressure. I put my finger right there and I pop that thing just like that. It's a pop. And I'm telling you, 99% of the time, you're not going to lose that jig with it. But so that fishing here in about another month, right around the 1st of March, is where I really like to start doing this up until the spawn. So that's a great way to catch crappie. 16th ounce fire line 3/8. I've used every line known to man, and this is the best line for popping and getting stuff off and being unhung. And it also gives you the right fall for this 16th ounce jig. So the fall is also important on that. I mean, if you're only in 2-3 foot of water, you got to make sure that you got the right fall on that, bringing it back to you. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is they throw it to the bank, and they're just reeling it in. A lot of times crappie want that thing slow falling down the deal. So how do you know that it's slow falling? You know it's slow falling if you have a little bow in your line right there. If the line's tight, there's no fall. If there's a little bit of bow in the line right there when you're bringing that back, that's usually the perfect deal that you're pulling it back on. So if you're fishing one of those banks, it's got slope to it and the break line, you want just a little bit of bow in your line, and you want that thing rolling down that break line. And then when you find them, a lot of times I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, boom! I got my bite, and that's where those fish will be most of the time on that break line. So one thing to learn there. But this is a St. Croix. I think this is 6.5 footer. It's got the perfect tip. Fire line, 3-pound diameter, 8-pound test, and then just a good reel, you know, fluker, any kind of reel that you want on there that holds line. You do have to, when you set this up, you have to put some rubber bands on there, or you'll have to put some monofilament and tie them together, and then that way it doesn't slip on the reel down there when you're doing it. So, one thing to know, but if you like to cast the bank, that little jig, the little Roadrunner, plain, no colored head Roadrunner with a Kalen or a Southern Pro, I think you guys sell, twister tail. You can't beat that combination. And Lake of the Ozarks, this would be more of a Truman color. Lake of the Ozarks, I like a red head, black body, white tail, a white, purple, white, something, because the water's a little bit clearer on that upper end of the Ozarks. So I want a little lighter jig, colored jig on the Ozarks, usually a little darker on Truman. The closer you get to the dam, you'll want probably a little bit lighter jig. You know, the water will be a little bit clearer.
And one thing he said that's very, very important is that I don't watch my line when I'm jigging, but when we're casting, we're watching our line. And so everybody thinks you're going to feel a bite when you get a crappie. You don't always feel the bite. When he's catching most of his fish, that line is bowed and it just straightens up a little bit, and then he sets the hook. And if you don't catch that, you're missing crappie. You really are. Just like my clients are missing crappie when I'm tight lining. When they feel that bump, they should set the hook. Well, if you're casting, you need to let that jig walk the bottom, walk that break line a little bit, and then bring it back. Somewhere in there, the slower retrieve, you'll see that line tighten up. And it's all about visual, feeling that little, it's a little bit. The bite on a crappie, either going to knock the pole out of your hand, or they're just going to be a tick, like I just tick that rod, just a tick, or it won't be anything. They'll pick that minnow up or that jig up and not even move with it. And when you feel that line go limp, set the hook. So those are the three kind of bites that I really concentrate on.
The other part of that I didn't mention, this 3-pound 8 fire line, which you guys have down there, it's high vis. So, you know, they sold it in black for years, and you can't see it. You can't see your line when it's out there. So, you know, I can't see it as well, you know, in the later years either. So I'm sitting here, you know, I'm looking at it, I see I got a bow in it, and I know I'm in good shape. The only time that I'm zipping it is if I'm in a foot or two of water and I'm just rolling it across there, you know, where I don't keep a bow. But most of the time, if you'll do that, you know, I tell people that haven't done this, and when they start, I had to tell him that too. But,
You catch fish in 1 or 2 foot of water?
yes.
Catch fish in shallow water, you catch fish in deep water. That's a great method, and I use this a lot in timber, especially on Truman Lake. The other method I use is a slip cord. I don't use a bobber very often that you clamp on your line, because I like to be able to cast and flip. Just like a bass fisherman flips a jig, I do the same thing with this slip cord. This is a Lindy slip cord. It's called Thill, T-H-I-L-L. It's all balsa wood. They actually label their corks with an 1/8 ounce. This is an 1/8 ounce or 16th ounce or 3/8. This is what I use a lot, especially if I'm flipping the banks. And I'm going to tie one on here for you. These are expensive things, but they're really, really good to use. I got a daughter that I used to fix her hair every morning before she went to school. I learned to use those to fix my line. I'm going to put on a slip cork here real quick. This bobber comes with a string bobber stop. I used that for years. You just slide it off, run this. Always run your jig in your line with the, in other words, I start at the top and run it through. But I'll first put a little bead on. Watch I don't stick you there. I'm going to put this bead on first. That's pretty good. You can see that.
Should have got a big bead.
Then I run my cork, the line through the cork. I'm not going to pull this bobber stop off, but then I take a second bead and I'll slide it through. Oop. Good catch. He used to play football for me.
Yeah.
I should have put him in receiver. So I run that line through there, and now I put my hook on. I'm just going to put this hook on. I'm going to tie a loop knot on here for you, real quick. So I've got a bobber stop, I got a bead, I got the bobber, and I put another bead on. So then I put my hook on, and the way I tie these is pretty quick. I'll just make a loop, and I'm just going to run this hook through that loop 3 times. This is one way, the easiest way to tie this. And once I get it through 3 times, then I just pull a little bit, and you'll see there's a gap right there. And then I pinch that off, and then I pull that line all the way down. And that right there says I'm fishing about 1.5 feet deep from there down. So when I do that, then this happens to be little Bobby Garland, baby shad. This is the #1 selling bait in the country, is the baby shad. But now, this is how I flip the banks. So I take an 11-foot rod generally, and I just pull everything right here. And I'm flipping the bank where if I throw it out there, it's just going to hit the water. Now I gotta just swing it out there and let it set there. So I drop it in there, and when the ripples start going around, floating out, if I don't get bit, then I take my rod tip, I hold it down to water, just about 3 inches off of it like before, and I just pop, pop, pop. And that cork will just start moving. And then I stop it, let the ripples vanish, and I'll pop, pop, pop again. So what I'm doing is I'm flipping this thing in where the cork will stand up, which is about 1 foot of water. And then I'm pulling it out to about 3 foot of water. And then I'll pick it up and move again.
So show them how. I mean, basically what's happening is that goes down, hits that bobber stop up there. That's how deep we're fishing right there.
Catch a lot of crappie right there.
Deadly in the spawn when they're that far off the bank. You can sometimes you're fishing that deep, just depending on where the crappie are. One other thing with this is, man, I hate to give all my secret, but about,
You sure you're gonna tell them?
yeah, about the middle of November to about December, if you go in the upper ends of any creek on Truman, Lake of the Ozarks, around any structure, this right here is a deadly combination. So you're out there and it's 20 degrees one day, and the next day it gets up to 50, 45, 50 degrees. That's when you want to be fishing, and those fish work up those logs. And I learned this one time. I was way up in the creek, up deep water, up in that area up there, and I'm sitting here and I've got my big long pole, and I can't catch a fish. And every old timer that I went by up there had a cork on. Now he didn't have a slip cork, but they had a cork. And I'm saying, I'm with this guy, I'm trying to impress him, showing him we can catch crappie, but we can't catch anything. And I'm like, what is going on? So I got in there and tied one of these on. I had it about 18 inches deep. First log we flip out, boom. It goes down. I had an 1/8 ounce jig on, black and chartreuse. Every log that we dipped up that creek had a crappie on it. And I'm telling you right now, I don't know what it was, but if I took a long pole and tried to hold it out there, I would not get bit. As soon as I took this little deal, I think it was how still they just wanted that jig still on that log, and boy, they were working up because the sun was warming the water up enough on that deal. But that is this is deadly in the fall too, late fall fishing on structure.
And over brush piles. You can use that bobber over any brush pile. Fish aren't generally stacked in a brush pile. They're either going to be on the side of it, ready to ambush something coming out, or they're going to be sitting on top, waiting for something to come into it. So when I fish early spring, I'm tight lining. 2 jigs. 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 foot of water. When the sun comes up and it's getting better, closer to the spawn time, then I take my jigs just like this and I'll crank it up about right there. And if that middle where Chad's standing, if that was the bank, I'm going to drop that first jig in the water and put the second jig just about 2 inches under the water where I can see it. And I'm going to go down the bank at a 45 degrees, and I'm testing to see if the fish have moved up. And so I judge how deep I am by my depth of my jigs there and how much line I have out. And if I get bit once or twice and catch a crappie up tight, then I take this off and I go to my bobber and I'm slip corking in. Or I could pull out. The reason I don't do a lot of in open water along riprap, I tight line and I use a slip cork. If I'm in timber, I'm casting. Make sense? You got to be able to work that bank. And I'm telling you that if I catch a fish right here on a log and I'm out here casting, I need to throw or have my clients throw right back in there. Because if you're catching males, which are black, they turn black in the spawn. If I'm catching one and I pull it out, another one's going to move in because he's on a bed. Once the males move, the females move in, they'll spawn, and within 2 days, the fry is gone. But there will be constant moving. So if I'm in a weed patch, if I was gone to Florida, I'd be in the lilies every time. Because somewhere in those lilies, and that's where it was won this year by king pole fishermen. And a 14-foot boat probably, with no electronics. They're dipping. But when they get a hole that has fish in it, you go right back into it, there's going to be another one. They just keep reloading, is what I'm trying to explain to you. So if you're going down the bank catching fish, don't catch one and keep going. Hit that area thoroughly because you'll catch bunch more. Okay? So those are key things about old school fishing, the way I do it.
You like the beaver tail?
Oh, you know, the baits I use truly are the Bobby Garland baits, but I've used beaver bottoms ever since Yum had them. They were called beaver tails, and they had a little ball on the end of it, pointed. I'd pinch that ball off and I'd use this. When you design baits, you got to think about what's out there on the market. And this baby shad, there's not a crappie company in the world that doesn't bank a baby shad. And if that isn't copyright breaking the law, I don't know what is. But every one of them has got a baby shad. Why? Because it sells more, most of them. What you have is a young minnow look to it. It's got a body, taper, and a little skinny tail. That's more of a fry look. But it wiggles, it moves, it catches fish. The next one I use is a slab slayer. This happens to be a 2-inch. And if the bite is tough, you better have a 2-inch on. If the bite's aggressive, I put a 3-inch on because the bigger the bait, the better. Okay? And I like that slab slayer because it's fluted. It catches water. It's built to put a minnow in there. And I also use a minnow minder. That's one of my favorites. But this bait I have used forever. It is a paddle tail. I use a paddle tail, one, because the fish look up when they see. They don't bite down unless they see it go by them. Do they go down to eat? Yes. But their eyes are set in their head where they protrude out and up. So a crappie sees this better because it's flat tail. You can split it to make it a paddle. It's got a rib body. No other baits have rib bodies. This moves water. You know, the key to catching fish is understanding that they have a lateral line in their system, and when a bait hits the water, they're alerted. So whatever they're doing, they're alerted. Something's coming. So when they bring this bait back, it's pushing water. They can feel that. They're drawn to this bait. I'm telling you. The other thing is you can put scent on it all you want to along those ribs and just set it down there and just let it dissolve. Okay? This is an excellent bait because it's different than any other bait, and a lot of people don't use it. And that's their fault in my game. I can't tell you how many tournaments we've won on Truman Lake or got in the top 5 with a bait like this. You with me? And the other thing I'll say real quick is the redneck rubber hooks I use because they're strong. But he and I did win a tournament that the lake was up 16 feet. And everybody uses 16-ounce jigs or 8-ounce jigs. Well, they are pulling water. And when you got fish that are on trees and they're pulling water, anytime they drop their 16-ounce jig, their jig would be over here. And the fish are still here. We were using 2 jigs, 1/4 ounce and an 1/8 ounce.
That was, I believe, the first Missouri championship.
First one.
Yeah.
We were dropping down catching our fish because we had to wait on them. Big difference. Big difference. So, you know, you got to work those things in your head. Crappie or tournament fishing is all about making decisions and being good at it. And then either having a lot of information before you get there, or you're really good at diagnosing a brand new lake. And if you've been there many times, you're going to get better at it. But anything else?
Just one last thing to add. So we talked about when they're on the bank. This is the rig that that I prefer. If you don't want a spider rig, which spider rigging is deadly, if you have this rod set up like this, and one more of these, you can catch fish on any lake during the spawn. So, I go out, I start casting the bank, beating that bank down, fish aren't there. Got cold that night, something happened, whatever it might be. I thought you moved that. Now I'm hung up.
I can catch you.
So I'll take that out. Yeah, don't pop that out. So I start out with this. They're not on the bank. I'm a weekend fisherman. If I have this and this in my arsenal, I can catch fish. So not on the bank. I move my boat out into 6 to 8 foot of water. Start taking this 2-pole, working up the brake lines. They're not there. I move out a little bit into, depending on how far they moved out because of the cold front or whatever happened. So those fish aren't leaving the creek. They're not leaving the area. They're not leaving the creek. But they might not be in 1 to 6 foot of water where you can get them with this pretty easy. So then you start with this and you start working those brake lines back and forth. And that's, if you've got this, 2 of these, and 1 of these, you can go to any lake in the world during the spawn and catch fish.
I got one more thing to show you, and if you got questions, we're going to hang around here. The one thing else I'm going to show you is that when I was young, I fished below the dam here on Truman when the lake starts to get high and they're letting water out. Anybody fish below the dam? Well, hey, you can catch crappie, you can catch walleye, you can catch most anything. But here's a trick that I did, and I learned it because I was a young kid. I didn't have a lot of money, and I worked all the time. I put a bobber on, and then I would put my hook on, and I'm slip corking. Okay. The other way I tie that loop knot is like this: 1, 2, 3, and I pull that fingers out, and I pull that hook through there one time, and then I pull it a little bit to get that little distance I showed you earlier, and then I pull both of them, and then I go one at a time until I get it getting close, and then I just pull and let go. And I'll show you what I'm doing here if you want to see it later. But that'll be a loop knot at the right distance. But with what I'm wanting to show you is the problem I had fishing below, and I'd lose my corks. I'd lose my jigs. So my buddy and I would go down there and fish, and I'd tie a slip cork on, but I didn't put a bobber stop on it. I'd make my bobber stop like this. Double my line, and then I'd just make a loop and pull that little line through there, and I'd have about an 1/8 ounce loop up here tied. You with me? It's a slip knot. So I just pull it down just a little bit and get it to where it almost go out, but then that's my bobber stop. You with me? So now I take that pole of mine and I sling that cork out there in that jig, and I'd have it set about 8 foot down, and it would float over a certain area. I'd get bit every time at a certain spot, which I knew there was probably a boulder or something out there. But I'd get hung up out there, and I'd break off, and I'd lose a cork, I'd lose a jig, and I'd lose plastic. But when I got hooked up by doing this little slip knot like this, and I got hung up, all I had to do was pull until that slip knot would just slide loose, and then my bobber was able to slide, so I put my rod tip. Now, you don't need to learn this, Chris. When this goes down here, I put my rod tip down by the water and I just shake it. And my bobber walks all the way back to the bank. I'd reach down there and pick up my bobber. While he's fishing, I'd reach in his tackle box and get his hook. And I tie it on again. And I catch fish all day long and never lose my bobber. So if you're in a boat and there's willow trees and you want to fish under that willow tree, do a slip knot like that. Because if you get hung up, you're not going to disturb the fish. You just pop that, bring your bobber back to the boat, pick it up, and do it again. You with me? Hey, we're tickling to death you came. Yep. Set in on all this boring stuff. I got more stories to tell you tomorrow. I'll be here. I got one on my dad you'll enjoy, and one on my mom you'll enjoy. But the deal is, we're here to teach and help you get to be a better crappie fisherman. We don't tell all the secrets, but we tell you 99% of them. Well, maybe I'm a story in there. Yeah. But we'll answer any question you have about live scope or whatever. Thanks for coming out, and I hope you bring people with you tomorrow.